What would you say if a cop looked at your shaking hands and said, "You seem nervous right now?" If you answer that the wrong way, your simple traffic stop can turn into a search in seconds. If you answer it the right way, you can shut down the fishing trip before it starts. Hit subscribe right now because what I'm about to give you is the kind of script you forget until the worst moment. Smash like now so you can find this again when your heart is pounding on the side of the road. You're about to learn the exact sentence you need in the next 5 seconds. You're going to learn why cops use the nervous line so often. You're going to learn how your own mouth gets you in trouble after that line. And you're going to learn how to stop a normal ticket from turning into a full-blown roadside investigation. Most people have no idea how dangerous that one comment really is. It sounds small, it sounds casual, but it is often the bridge from traffic stop to search talk. I've analyzed over 200 body cam videos, and you see the same pattern again and again. The officer says you look nervous. The driver starts explaining. Then the officer digs deeper. Then the stop gets longer. Then consent gets pushed. Then the driver talks themselves into a corner. Let me show you exactly how to keep that from happening to you. When a cop says you seem nervous, your body usually betrays you first. Your hands shake. Your voice gets weird. Your mouth gets dry. You start smiling at the wrong time. That does not mean you're guilty. It means you're human. Here's the reality. Even innocent people get nervous when armed officers walk up to their window at night, but the officer already knows that. That is why the line works so well. It makes you feel like you need to explain yourself, so you start rambling. You say you've never been pulled over before. You say you're late. You say you had coffee. You say your cousin borrowed the car. You say way too much. That is where the danger starts. Your job is not to convince the officer you're relaxed. Your job is to protect your rights, keep your answers short, and stop the stop from growing legs. The first tactic is to agree with the obvious and shut the search door at the same time. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, traffic stops make people nervous. I do not consent to any searches. Word for word, memorize that line. It works because it does two smart things at once. First, you take the power out of the nervous comment. You do not deny it. You do not argue about it. You do not try to act cool. You simply say the truth. Traffic stops do make people nervous. Second, you move straight to the real issue, search. That is where this often goes next. If you wait until after more questions, you may already be halfway into a mess. Watch what happens when you use that line. The officer throws out the bait. You do not bite. You do not start talking about your whole day. You do not try to prove you are calm. You just say your line and stop. That pause matters. Your silence stops the officer from using your own words against you. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it sounds normal, clear, and reasonable. You are not being rude. You are not being loud. You are simply protecting yourself. Bad way. Most drivers say, "No, I'm not nervous. Why are you asking that?" Then they start babbling. Their story gets messy, and the officer thinks they found an opening. Good way. Smart drivers say, "Officer, traffic stops make people nervous. I do not consent to any searches." Then the record is clean, the answer is short, and the search line is already blocked. And yes, that matters in the law too. Courts have repeatedly warned that nervousness is weak proof by itself because regular people get nervous around police all the time. One federal case, United States versus Chavez Valenzuela, said even strong nervousness by itself did not justify stretching a stop. In plain English, shaking hands do not magically equal crime. That is a huge point for you because officers often talk like nervousness is a smoking gun. It is not. It is a human reaction. This is 100% legal. You are allowed to refuse consent to a search. You are allowed to keep your answer short. You are allowed to say something true without handing over your whole life story. Your goal is not to win the officer's approval. Your goal is to stop giving free evidence away. There is another reason this line works. It keeps you from saying dumb extra words under stress. Under pressure, your brain wants to fill silence. That is dangerous. Silence feels weird to you, but silence protects you. The officer already controls the scene. Do not help build the case against yourself. Give the short answer, state no consent, then breathe. Think you could keep your answer this short when your nerves hit? Tell me in the comments because this is where most people crack. The second tactic is about stopping the ramble before it starts. Once the officer hears anything in your voice, they may hit you with follow-up questions fast. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? Why are you in this area? Who owns the car? Why are your hands shaking? Here's the trick they don't want you knowing. You do not have to turn a traffic stop into a personal interview. If you're the driver, you do have to handle the basic traffic business. That means your license, registration, and proof of insurance. But that does not mean you need to answer every fishing question they throw at you. You look at the officer and say this: "I'll provide my license and registration, but I'm not answering questions." Those exact words, keep your tone flat. No attitude, no eye roll, no smart mouth grin, just simple and calm. This line works because it draws a bright line between what the stop is actually about and what the officer is trying to turn it into. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it removes the chatter that officers often use to build suspicion. When you stop talking, they get less material to twist. Bad way. Most drivers say, I'm coming from my friend's house. Well, not really my friend, more like my cousin's friend, and I was only there for a minute. Then the officer hears nerves, changing details, and an opening for more pressure. Good way. Smart drivers say, I'll provide my license and registration, but I'm not answering questions. Then the stop stays tighter and you stop feeding the conversation. Let me show you exactly why this matters. The officer does not need your long story to write a speeding ticket. They do not need your travel plan to tell you about a broken taillight. They ask because people talk too much when they're scared, and once you start talking, one answer becomes five becomes 10 becomes contradictions. Then you spend the next 20 minutes trying to fix the thing you should never have said in the first place. Here's the reality. Nervous drivers love to explain, and explaining feels smart in the moment. You think if you sound honest enough, the officer will relax. But long answers usually do the opposite. Long answers create more places for the officer to question you. Short answers close doors. This also fits the law. In Rodriguez versus United States, the Supreme Court said a traffic stop has a mission. In plain English, the stop is supposed to be about the traffic issue, not a never-ending hunt for something else. That does not mean officers never ask extra questions. They often do. It means you do not have to help them build a bigger case by volunteering extra facts. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection when the officer is trying to turn nerves into conversation and conversation into suspicion. And before anyone says this sounds rude, no, it doesn't if you say it right. You can be respectful and still protect yourself. You can hand over your documents, you can keep your hands where they can be seen, you can follow lawful movement commands, and you can still decline the roadside interview. Those things can all be true at the same time. The third tactic is the line that ends the stretch-out game. After the nervous comment, after the small talk, after the document check, you need to know when to ask the biggest question of the stop. Listen closely because this is critical. If the ticket or warning is done or it feels like the traffic part is over, you ask one clean question. Am I being detained or am I free to leave? Word for word. Burn that into your brain. This line matters because many stops do not get ugly in the first minute. They get ugly in minute 8, or minute 12, or minute 20. The officer has already checked your license. The warning is basically done. But now they keep circling. They keep asking about your nerves. They keep asking where you're headed. They keep standing there hoping you say yes to something. That is where your question changes everything. Bad way. Most drivers say, so are we done here or what? Then they keep talking, keep answering, and the stop keeps drifting. Good way. Smart drivers say, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Then the officer has to face the real issue and give a clear answer. Watch what happens when you ask it calmly. If the officer says you are free to leave, the game is over. Leave. Do not hang around to win an argument. Do not stay to prove a point. If the officer says you are still detained, now that choice is on the record and that matters later. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it shows you tried to find out whether the detention was still lawful. That is a big deal. This is 100% legal. You are allowed to ask whether you are free to leave. You are not resisting by asking a question. You are not being hostile by asking a question. You are making the officer define the stop. That helps you, and it helps your lawyer if things go sideways later. Rodriguez matters here again. The court said police cannot drag a stop out longer than needed for the traffic purpose unless they have more real facts. In plain English, they cannot turn every stop into a roadside crime hunt just because they feel like it. And nervousness alone is usually too weak for that. That is why this question is so powerful for you. It forces the stop back onto legal rails. There is one more reason to love this line. It breaks the spell. A lot of drivers do not realize the stop should have ended already. They sit there like students waiting for permission to stand up. This question reminds you that time matters. The officer's hunch is not enough by itself. The officer's vibe is not enough. The officer saying you look nervous is not enough. Once you ask the question, the stop becomes much harder to keep fuzzy. If you've made it this far, you're serious about protecting your rights. Show me by hitting that like button. The fourth tactic is what you do if the officer tells you to step out after saying you seem nervous. This happens a lot. The nervous comment becomes the setup. Then comes the command. Step out of the car. Here is the key. Do not confuse physical compliance with legal consent. You can comply with the command and still protect your rights. Here's exactly what you say. I will comply, but I do not consent to any searches. Simple, clean, strong. This matters because officers are usually allowed to order a driver out of a lawfully stopped car. That rule comes from Pennsylvania versus Mims. In plain English, if the stop itself is valid, they can usually tell you to step out for safety reasons. So do not fight that with your body. Do not yank the door. Do not plant your feet. Do not turn a bad night into a dangerous one. But also do not think stepping out means you agreed to a search. Those are two different things. Bad way. Most drivers say, fine, do whatever you want. Then the officer hears consent and your protection drops fast. Good way. Smart drivers say, I will comply, but I do not consent to any searches. Then you follow the command while keeping your rights alive. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. Compliance and consent are not the same thing. One is you following an order. The other is you giving permission. Do not blend them together. Keep them separate with your words. Former police officers have confirmed this works because a calm driver who complies but refuses consent is much harder to paint as combative. And keep one more thing in mind. If they ask to pat you down, search your pockets, or look inside the car after you step out, your answer does not need to change. I do not consent to any searches. That line ages well. It works early, it works late, it works while standing outside the car. It works while waiting for backup. Your script stays simple so your brain does not melt when the pressure climbs. Now let's put the legal backbone under everything you just learned. First is Rodriguez versus United States. In kid-level English, that case says a traffic stop cannot keep stretching longer and longer just because the officer wants to fish around. Time matters. The reason for the stop matters. Your third tactic works because of that rule. Second is Pennsylvania versus Mims. In simple English, that case says an officer can usually tell a driver to step out during a valid stop. That is why your fourth tactic matters so much. You comply with the movement order, but you still refuse consent to search. Third is United States versus Chavez Valenzuela. In plain English, that case said nervousness, even strong nervousness, did not by itself justify keeping the stop going. That is why your first tactic is so strong. You do not need to argue that you are calm. You need to stop nervousness from becoming a fake green light for more digging. Here's the reality. These cases all point the same way. Your words should be short, your rights should be clear, your silence should be intentional, and your consent should stay firmly off the table. Now picture this whole thing in real life so you can hear how it sounds in your mouth. You're driving home after work, it's dark, your chest is already tight because you hate getting pulled over, the lights flash, you stop. The officer comes up and says your lane change looked sloppy. Then the officer studies your face and says, you seem nervous. The wrong way starts right there. You laugh too hard. You say you're always nervous. Then you explain you had energy drinks. You're late. Your uncle borrowed the car last week, and there's nothing illegal inside, not that you're saying there would be. Now the officer smells fear. The officer hears extra details. The officer starts asking more. Then comes, mind if I take a look? Then you say, I guess if you want. And now your whole night gets torn apart. Now here's the right way. The officer says, you seem nervous. You say, officer, traffic stops make people nervous. I do not consent to any searches. Then you stop talking. The officer asks where you're coming from. You say, I'll provide my license and registration, but I'm not answering questions. The officer keeps talking. You stay calm. You hand over the documents. The warning gets written. The officer lingers. You ask, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If the officer says you are free to go, you leave. If the officer says step out first, you step out and say, I will comply, but I do not consent to any searches. That is the difference between a driver who gets pulled into the trap and a driver who protects their position from the first 5 seconds on. One version talks too much and gives the stop extra fuel. The other version stays calm, keeps the record clean, and never gives free consent. Coming next week, what to do when cops ask to search your phone. Subscribe because that one mistake can expose your whole life in under a minute. Lock this in before you go. If they say you seem nervous, you answer with truth and no consent. If they try to turn the stop into a chat session, you handle the documents and stop the questions. If the traffic business is over, you ask if you are free to leave. If they tell you to step out, you comply with the movement but never consent to a search. Your power here is not in sounding tough. Your power is in sounding clear. Short words, calm tone, strong boundaries. That is how you protect yourself when your body is shaking and your brain wants to panic. Hit subscribe so you catch the phone search video next week. Smash like if this gave you a script you can actually use under pressure. And drop a comment telling me which line you're going to memorize first. Stay safe out there.